Hey, this is Jonathan Gilliam. I'm about to start the show, but everybody keeps telling me they want me to make my commercials for my books shorter. But good grief, I feel like it's so important that I have to tell you exactly what these books can do for you. But I'm going to make it shorter, so here goes. Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival. It's a best-selling book. It will teach you how to look at yourself and your life and your business and your home and your school from the attacker's point of view. There's 2 workbooks that go with it, the Threat Assessment Workbook and the Defense Assessment Workbook. Those are fillable with the knowledge that you get out of Sheep No More. And then for the children, The Adventures of Team Little Bigs, a parent's book for children. The children get the book with the pictures. It has all the lessons built into the pictures. And the parents can go to teamlittlebigs.com, download the lesson plans, and then teach their children through the books. There, I did it in under a minute. Let's start the show. This is Jonathan Gilliam back in on the Experts Podcast on a Tuesday. Releasing the show a little bit later today because I'll tell you, the news cycle kind of stopped yesterday, last night anyway. Typically when I do the show, I do it early in the morning, late at night, and I just didn't see the news cycle is speaking, kind of spiking. And I could have talked about basically what I'm going to talk about now. But I wanted to get a little bit more pinpointed things to talk about. And sure enough, it raised its head. And I knew that it would. The interesting thing about this couple that confronted, really they're rioters. They keep using the word protesters in St. Louis. But they were really rioters. I mean, they had just broken down a steel gate that led into a private, wealthy community. Again, they're in there protesting and rioting in places where they know that there's no change. The only change that's going to come out of what they're doing is intimidation of people who just are hardworking, who have money. They're not going to change as far as the reality of what's happening in the world, or in this country at least. They're not going to change what has to be effectively done in the inner city and in the community, or the cultural system around this country of what's happening in the inner city. It's dangerous, deadly. I mean, look at Chicago, children being killed like crazy by gang members. New York City, the shootings are up 120 or 170%, somewhere in between there. It's hard to tell exactly what the number is. I've seen 2 different numbers. You have a perfect example where this CHOP, the place where they took over in Seattle, just yesterday, a 16-year-old boy was killed and a 14-year-old was shot, both black. And that was the 3rd shooting in a week. So that's a perfect example. They're sitting there complaining about police. Meanwhile, police haven't shot anybody in CHOP, but 3 people have been killed and 3 people are in critical condition. I think all of them black. I may be wrong about that, but at least yesterday they were all black. Police didn't do any of that. That's the culture inside that location. Who do you think makes up that location? Weirdo hippie type people and black people from the inner city, or from this leftist type of a movement. That is where the problem lies. You could fire every single bad cop it's stupid and doesn't know how to police, actually didn't listen to, what was taught to them in the academy and really functions off of emotion. That's why they end up hurting people, or maybe they're just narcissistic idiots that shouldn't have been on the job in the beginning in the first place. First of all, those people probably would have been able by this day and age could have come up with a system to police them out. But that didn't happen because law enforcement and mayors and governors and presidents are all focused, and activists are all focused on getting the numbers correctly. So it's across the board, even black, white, gay, straight, all the while forgetting about the most important part of it, effective. Are you good at your job? Can you think your way through it? At the same time, I will give this criticism to law enforcement, which I've been given over and over and over, is that you are not the parent of the people. You're not the person hired to go around and intimidate the people. You're not a strong arm of the law of the political government. You're not their strong arm. You're not the military. You're there to enforce laws and keep the peace. And keeping the peace, quite often, I don't care if you've worked in the 75th precinct and the 88 and all these different places in New York City where it's really bad, you still have to understand that you have to look at every situation, and most cops do, okay? You have to look at every situation individually. The problem with most cops is they become very smart, street smart, in the way things are in those communities. So the communities are aggressive, they become more aggressive. And then when they step out of those communities, they're aggressive to everyone because they're looking at what potentially could go wrong, the worst that it could go wrong. But it's a cyclical event. People who aren't up to something but live in those communities or live out of the communities, they deal with law enforcement and they have that I'm the authority type of mentality, and instead of I'm the keeper of the peace and the person who keeps the law or enforces the law, keeps the peace, enforces the law, it goes strictly to I don't have a relationship with you, back to F off, do as I say. And that is not going to work over a long period of time. Not in a free community, it's not going to work. So those things have never really evolved. It's not taught to cops. They're by and large, all the great cops I ever worked with were really educated by the street, not by the academy. They go through an academy, but they're really educated by the street. That's who teaches them. And so what you end up getting, and I've said this over and over and over again, what you end up getting is this inner city spillover of disrespect and aggression and this bad relationship between law enforcement and them. And then on top of that, you have, and that was my criticism for law enforcement, but the other side of the criticism is that the inner city is completely destroyed. Their fashions have milked their way into, regular, hardworking, or good kids fashion. And that's never good. When your fashion sense is being dictated by people who've been in jail, that's never a good thing. Okay? What I've found throughout life has nothing to do with color of skin. If you're a good, respectable person, your fashion sense reflects that. And who you hang out reflects that. The words that come out of your mouth reflect that. And if you are motivated or starstruck by thugs or weirdos or communists, you are going to reflect their fashion, their personas, their stupidity. And that's a problem. So all the while, getting back to the story that I started with what happened in St. Louis, these rioters broke down a steel gate in a very well-to-do neighborhood that has nothing to do with the inner city. And they went in there not to go in and shake hands and get to know the people. First of all, you don't do that in private property. You don't break down a gate and go in where people own the property. And they have a law in Missouri It's like a stand your ground type law. You can protect your property and your person. These rioters, I don't care what anybody says. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that these people are so organized. They're so well funded. They're doing things like they said, well, they were throwing water bottles. Well, they were throwing frozen water bottles. Okay. Not necessarily there, but in a lot of these places. You know, they do things to mask that. That's one of the reasons why they wear covers over their face and gloves. They can put stuff in the gloves and they can hit people with those and cause brain damage. It's happened. The water bottles alone are dangerous. Using spray paint to spray in the eyes of police officers or lasers so they can get the cops to close their eyes and then throw rocks at them. These are things that have happened. And that's with the peaceful protesters, right? So the reality is, and this is what I think the way it should be looked at, as soon as a movement shows any sense of violence, they have anybody else that then connects themselves to that movement should not be allowed to protest. They should be allowed, if they're going to protest and be allowed to do it, it should be done in a very specific area where they cannot migrate around and they can't cause trouble. It's going to happen here in this open field or over there at the fairground. They can do all the screaming and hollering that they want, but they can't come out of that or else they'll be arrested. Everybody else that wants to march or speak or, whatever, that's fine. But as soon as your movement starts causing trouble federally around the country, they should not be allowed to march because they should be looked at as rioters and people who are detrimental to the national security of this country. And it is. And I don't think that goes against our free speech or free, the freedom to assemble or any of that stuff, because that is breaking things and tearing things up and killing people and burning things down is not protected by the Constitution. If that was the case, patriots would be freaking destroying this whole thing immediately right now. So these two individuals, this husband and wife, came out and they did what they had to do. I mean, it wasn't pretty. I offered on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, anybody knows them, let me know so I will give them classes on weapons handling and weapon safety, because goodness knows, and tactics. You come out there and you stand next to each other, sweep the gun. She's got her finger on the trigger, but whatever. Listen, it's a perfect example of what I've been talking about. Everybody talks about how they're like, well, we're gonna, if the crazies come after us, we're gonna win because we got the guns. Well, if you don't know how to use the guns, I mean, I think really a majority of people could have rushed them. They probably were too afraid to even use the gun. That's what I'm saying. I don't know them, but also there's been talk that they're Black Lives Matter supporters, that they are liberal, but I don't really think it matters because they demonstrated in their actions that if you stand your ground against these people, it's effective. If you arm yourself, which you have the right to do, it's effective. And guess what? Nobody looted their home. Nobody burned their home down. The home's still standing. It worked. And that's what that's what it's all about. These mobs of rioters should not be able, and communists should not be able to just roam all over the place, destroying anything that they want. And that's what has been happening. And these people stopped it from happening in their neighborhood, which had nothing to do with what they're talking about. Again, if these rioters and protesters, really rioters, wanted to change anything, including Black Lives Matter, they would be going to the inner city and working it out there with the precincts and with the people that live there and fixing that problem. They don't do it. Nothing's going to change. Nothing else has to change but that. Nothing. You're never going to affect how people feel about individuals have certain color of their skin or whatever until there's a meeting of the minds. You're never going to force it. That's why that old saying, kill them with kindness. That's actually, you either have to have the strength to kill them or you just show them that you're a good person And eventually most people will come around. But you can't force people like this. It's not going to work. And the reality is it's not even about racism. I keep saying that over and over again. This has to do with communism. They're just using it just like they use the gay movement, just like they use the transgender movement, just like they use all these different things. Has nothing to do with Black Lives Mattering. If that was the case, they would be in Chicago right now stopping what's happening there, and they're not doing that. So the big thing that came out of this story for me is two things. One, liberal or conservative, these people donned their weapons and stood their ground, and it worked. That's the first thing. Secondly, the prosecutor that is now trying to go after them is, surprise, surprise, a huge leftist. And she doesn't even hide the fact, really, that she's a leftist. I mean, disgustingly left. Let me see. Let me pull up this. Here it is right here. On foxnews.com, there is a story about Kimberly Gardner. She's the St. Louis prosecutor, and she's the one investigating them. Now, she described this as a violent assault against the protesters. Remember, these people had broken through a gate and gone onto private property, and she's still calling them protesters. Why? Because she is a communist. She's a globalist. She's a socialist. Just throw them all in there. Part of her campaign was financed by George Soros. Not even hiding it. Like every other place where these weirdos get into office, the prosecution rate or conviction rate of felons has dropped dramatically. She's sued city officials. She's a problem. She causes problems. And she follows the same exact playbook as de Blasio in New York, as Cuomo in New York, as what's her name that is the governor of Michigan, Whitmer, as the mayor of LA and the governor of California, all these people, on and on. You look at every single one of these leftist mayors and governors and congressmen and women and senators, and what do? They follow the same playbook. Is it not becoming evident to you? It should be. And calling these two people who stood on their property, never left their property, and saying that it was a violent assault is exactly the language that they would use. These leftist prosecutors and people in law would use. Now, I had a go back and forth between somebody, I talked about it a little bit on Amy Kramer, who's a friend of mine. She posted on Facebook about, is the ship sinking? And of course, everybody on there, because they're all patriots, they all think that, and they say, no way, not on this watch, not on my watch. And so I put on there that, the reality is that none of the people that were responding like that are going to pick up a gun or put themselves on the line or do anything because they're too afraid to go to jail or get killed. And I'm not saying, when I say that, it's not a real concern. It is a real concern. These people have shown that they're very violent and they can kill. They've also shown that if you do what they do, you're going to go to jail, most likely. Why? Because they do it in sheer numbers, and they have prosecutors like this weirdo from Kimberly Gardner from St. Louis that lets the people from the left out. They go and riot, they burn things down, and she lets them out of jail. By the way, if you see her picture, she looks like she has fetal alcohol syndrome, which I wouldn't doubt. So my gripe here is the same as it's always been, is that it's not true. People won't get up and go do anything because they're afraid to get killed or put in jail. But if you work together on the whole, that wouldn't happen. You're not going to go to jail if 1 million people are out there standing their ground like these two people did. Now, I don't know if these two people will get charged. I have a feeling it'll work its way out, and this is all political grandstanding by this Kimberly Gardner fool. But if 1,000 people stood there against, or 10,000 against these, and listen, it's not impossible to muster up 10,000 people that believe in this country. Where are the wealthy people that will help us finance it? Where are the conservative or constitutionally minded prosecutors who will stand up? You see what happens when globalists who don't consider them leftist get into the presidency or get into politics, especially the presidency. George Bush and 41 and George Bush 43 were both, or are both, globalists. One was, one still is. That's how John Roberts got into office, or into the Supreme Court. And he's a total leftist fool. He's shown it. He was a covert installation of the globalists. So we have to start realizing, folks, you can say whatever you want. You can pump yourself up and everybody else, but it's not going to matter, because what's happening is the left is action oriented. The right, you don't do anything. You show up for a Trump rally. That's it. You don't stand against every once in a while it happens. It happened in Michigan against Whitmer, and it happened in Virginia, 20,000 strong, armed to the teeth. And nobody messed with them. How much more proof do you need to have? But you won't do anything. And it's going to get worse. And it honestly reminds me of the Jews in Germany, and how, I don't know, I don't know. I never sat down with somebody that was there, but looking at history and looking at how it happened in any genocide type of incident that takes place over time. People that wait too long to take action against the anarchists, the communists, the fascists, which they're all, I don't know if you realize, they're all the same. You look at what that ends up being in all those groups. It's all the same. All these people that on the left are accusing Trump of being a fascist. Meanwhile, their tactics are fascist. Get rid of statues. Get rid of books that preach real or teach real history, or get rid of the Bible that preaches truth. Get rid of anybody that doesn't feel like they feel. Come together and do it with force. That is fascist. That is communist. That is socialist. That is globalist. That's the way they work. It's also Satan. And the people in Germany, the Jews in Germany, I don't know exactly how it happened, but they just never took action. They didn't take action. I don't know if they thought that probably it wasn't going to go as bad as it did, and then it got a little worse. And then they thought, well, maybe we're just restricted to our homes, and then it got a little worse. And then the next thing you know, they're standing in front of trains, and they didn't act. I would have rather died fighting. And then it got a little worse. They got separated, put on the trains, sent to these camps. Still sitting there thinking probably, what is this all about? And it pains my heart when I watch these documentaries about this, because not just the Jews in Germany, but everybody else, there were rumors of this stuff going on, and no one took action. They didn't take any action until they were marched to the gas chambers. And or marched to a ditch where they were shot. And that was it. That was it until Allied forces got involved and went against them, and then ended up saving many of their lives. Do we have to wait this long? What are we waiting for? The difference between us and the Jews that were in Germany. And I know there's going to be people saying, I can't believe he's comparing what's happening in the United States to the Jews in Germany. Yeah, I'm doing it. Because we're being forced We're being forced not to make Black Lives Matter, not to make communities safer or people equal. We're being forced into a different form of government. And those that are patriots, those that believe in the founding fathers, those that are Christian, you are being eliminated. Now, the killing may not have happened yet, but you just look at St. Louis. It's a great example. 2 people stood their ground, and now they're being investigated by a leftist prosecutor, Kimberly Gardner. That's the way it starts. That is genocide. Genocide of your freedoms, genocide of your rights, genocide of your ability to defend yourself, and then eventually re-education camps, and eventually march to the showers, which happen to be gas chambers, or set in front of a ditch and shot in your head. Is that where we're going to go with this? We're just going to, even though we all are armed, you're just going to let that happen? It's shocking to me because, listen, there's no doubt in my mind there's not going to be an armed conflict. How do I know that? Because conservatives and constitutionalists and patriots and people that are on the left that are saying, I don't really think this is the way it should go, you all won't even meet up and talk. You'll go see, you're all up in arms because you can't go see somebody in concert and 50,000 people will show up. I know. I did security for some big people, and I remember standing on the edge of the stage looking out thinking, there's 70,000 people here. If we wanted to get 70,000 people to discuss how you fix this country, you can't do it. Are we going to wait until we are being marched to our death? And now many people will say, well, oh, come on, dude, you're going a little overboard with it there. Or like I've had liberal leftists from Sirius Radio come at me and say, this is ridiculous. You can't, because I was saying that it wouldn't surprise me if leftists tried to spread coronavirus at a Trump rally or around the South where, he's supported the most. And lo and behold, besides the protests that the media, for some strange reason, the media and Fauci and nobody else can seem to kind of put together 2 and 2 and say, well, it's been about a month, less than a month, and protests are still going on and the numbers of sick are out of control. Maybe it has something to do with it. They're not saying that. But the possibility I was saying is that somebody could go up and spread the coronavirus at these rallies and just going into cities being sick. And wouldn't you know, it's now being reported that Islamic jihadists are either using that or considering using that. But you wouldn't know that by the way the leftists attack me and say, that's just ridiculous, you're stupid. They said the same thing about me 6 years ago when I hosted Sean Hannity's radio show and did a whole entire show about the creep of communism. And it largely went unnoticed. I mean, people that follow me saw it, but it wasn't like it caused discussion. And here we are, this much further down the road in 6 short years. And look how far we've come in 2020 alone. Look how far we've come in the past month alone. So you think it won't happen? You're stupid. No, you're not stupid. Stupid means that you don't have the knowledge to make the adequate decision. You're incompetent. You refuse, or you're ignorant. You refuse to take the knowledge that you have, do the math, and realize where we're heading and how fast we're going there. And it's a terrible situation for this country, for young people, for elderly. Look at how many elderly have been killed in the past 2 months because of bad decisions by these same leaders. And then they come up with stuff like in L.A. It's being reported on Fox 11 out in L.A. City Council approves first step in replacing the LAPD community responders for nonviolent calls. Let me just clue you in on something. Anybody who's ever been in law enforcement will back this up. You don't know what call is going to end up being a violent call. You may get a report for, I don't know, an argument, or it could be something like, my neighbor blew his leaves over on my driveway, and a cop shows up and the dude standing there with a gun. Or maybe the person is suicidal. Who knows? My wife and I have had a bad disagreement. She's yelling at me, or the neighbors call and say the neighbors are screaming at each other. It sounds like they're in a terrible argument. They're married? Yes, husband and wife. Okay, we're going to send out a community leader. And they send them out, and they don't realize that he's stabbed her 15 times, and he's screaming at her body. These things happen, folks. And it just goes to show you how out of touch, how stupid, and what kind of space cases these people are. They think that they know what's best for you, but when you say, no, I don't agree with that, they tell you to shut up, and then they pass laws to stifle your opinion. That's what's happening. Idiots. Now, one other thing I want to just leave you with here. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about this coming week. This is something that you should be very alarmed at, okay? I have to find out what exactly I can say about this. For a long time, these things called fusion centers have been created. And these are where the police departments around the country, in cooperation with certain federal agencies, have created secured SCIFs in their facilities, and then they have computers and intelligence that's up to a secret clearance, so they say. Remember, the thing about secret clearance or any clearance is official. You may have somebody over here who has top secret information, and if they feel like, well, I'm just going to tell you this, and they tell them that, as long as nobody finds out, nobody's going to get in trouble. That stuff happens all the time. All the time, especially in these types of fusion centers. Now, before all the cops get all up in arms and everybody, listen, when I went through the background check for the FBI, they went to every place I've ever lived and talked to neighbors that they could find. They went through every single job I've ever had. They went through, and that wasn't even the worst I've had. I'm not going to say where it was, but one particular place where I had background check. They went to all the places where I lived. They interviewed the neighbors. Then they asked the neighbors for 3 people that they knew so they could make sure that the neighbors, what they were saying was viable and that they were trustworthy and that they weren't involved in something. That's how deep of a background check I've had on me multiple times. Police officers that sit on, and every 5 years in the FBI, we get another polygraph. And people say, well, those polygraphs aren't admissible in court. Well, that may be true. But polygraphs and polygraphers are excellent at statement analysis. And when they go in there with the evidence that they have, they can determine whether or not, in a lot of cases, you are up to something. It's like having your soul scrubbed every 5 years. And in other agencies, it's 3 years. Law enforcement, police officers on the state and city level that go into these fusion centers don't have to have any of that. In many cases around the country now, polygraphs aren't even used in law enforcement to hire people. And their background checks are limited. And now they're going to go in, and it's just like the politicians, right? You take these Congress people or senators, even presidents who have no clearance. People that work for them never get a background check. And then they're given top secret clearance. So there's been big leaks coming out of these fusion centers. They call them blue leaks. And a lot of this information has to do with sources and who they're investigating. So now you have these leftists on police departments that work their way into these fusion centers, and they're giving out information about who's being investigated, if it has to do with Black Lives Matter or any of the other leftist groups, and who the sources are so they can target them. And this is a major, major thing that no one is talking about. It's huge because it shows, just like it, you know, when you were talking about Comey and Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and Mueller and all the politicians and the fake dossier, how that was a conspiracy and how it was a group of people committing crimes together knowingly for the purpose of getting rid of a president and overthrowing a president, overthrowing an election. This shows that they are infiltrating into certain areas to get intelligence so that they can effectively disrupt investigations and any type of national security work that's looking at these leftists. This is alarming, folks. Very alarming. Look it up. Blue leaks. That's what these are called. And a big part of it has to do with the fact that they don't do the proper clearance with the people that are from law enforcement agencies, state and local, that are going into these fusion centers. Now, here's the thing I want you to think about, folks. When it comes to who is involved with the left and what their actions are, it's all out there for you to see. They're not hiding it. When we have these things called blue leaks, where these fusion centers that deal with law enforcement and classified information that's given to them by the federal government, where they have access to it, that in and of itself, when that information starts getting leaked out and it's very specific to the leftist movement, you have all the evidence that you need that they are coordinated. Why isn't the right coordinating against this? Why? I can't say it enough. It is time for people to start coming together and standing their ground. I'm Jonathan Gilliam. This is The Experts. The truth has arrived. Peace. We're out of here.